We finished all of the brains.
Yeah.
Okay.
We didn't do 13 or 14.
Okay. So today we will connect the dots.
Okay.
Where are the other people there?
I texted Laura,
Laura,
and
yes.
she said her son was throwing up today. She
Oh.
has a 17-month-old. I texted her. I told she was.
So only those who are here. That worksheet is due today. It's not tomorrow or another day. So sorry for those who are not here. There's no excuse. You can tell me that the dog ate your homework, right? So can you please...
My son ate it.
Right. Take a sheet of paper, write your names. Why don't we just go ahead and write 50 points for that worksheet? It is worth 50 points anyway.
We can use it. Are you sure you don't want them
You
back?
should
Turn them
Let
in.
you know who's here.
I think that's a good idea. Give it to me. No need to write down attendance. Just give me the worksheet. Sorry about giving you just one page. What chapter again? 13.
So got one. No, you don't.
I'm a little slow. Just a little bit.
As long as you
You're almost done. When is your next lecture test?
Next
June 3. Okay.
Next Wednesday.
Okay.
I thought we were doing the second part of the CNS, the final part.
And our journal reports are due June 1st.
This is the spinal cord. Okay, your journal report is due when?
June 1st.
June 1st, okay. Okay, so why is the color yellow?
It has this jaundice.
Do you know how we can change that?
You drank too much this weekend.
Just a little bit.
Anyway, you can see it, right?
Yeah.
So there's your spinal cord. We studied the brain, and we're going to look at the function of the spinal cord. Oh, I know. So here it is. Very important for us to understand, okay? So there's the spinal cord. We know when we open up the brain, I'm going to show you. You'll see there's the sheep brain is only up to this part. That's the one that we will receive. We will open up. And so in the lab practicals, if I have a pin sticking like that, there will be a pin. And if the pin is sticking like that, and I ask you to identify, the answer is spinal cord. If the pin is this way, identify medulla or the pons. The next bulge is the pons. Again, if it's like that, it's the spinal cord, and you answer the questions accordingly. Okay? And so the spinal cord is still part of the central nervous system. And so we look at the function of the spinal cord. Look at it must be, so this is peripheral nervous system, right? The peripheral nervous system is where you feel touches, and then from here, whatever you felt, your brain is the one that has to process that. So what type of nerve responds to sensation? Sensory. Okay. So sensory, right? So it has to reach the brain. That's how you become aware. So I'm thinking that the spinal cord must be a connector, right? It connects so that all sensations will reach the brain. So what do you think? This must be ascending, right? So what do you think? Do you think all ascending pathways must be sensory?
Yes.
Correct, right? So that's one. That's one of the functions of the spinal cord. It contains ascending pathways, right? Which means and they're sensory. That makes me aware of any kind of sensation. So then after my brain figures out and I want to respond, I have to tell my effector organs to respond. Where are my effector organs? Outside. So how will it be? How will I stimulate my effector organs from the brain going down? Through what? Through the spinal cord, right? So this is descending. What type of
So is
function?
it the association nerves that are going down?
Yes.
And spinal cord, and then it comes out to the
motor.
effector?
Yes,
Okay.
very good. But then the whole pathway is a motor pathway. So the spinal cord contains the spinal cord connects the brain with the peripheral nervous system via ascending and descending pathways. Okay? And also, have you heard of the word reflexes?
Yeah.
So the spinal cord, the other function of the spinal cord is, it is the site for reflexes. A reflex is an automatic response to a specific stimulus. It's a quick automatic response, and it's meant to be protective, like life-saving, right? Let's say you held something hot, you drop that immediately because of reflex. You drop that before you said ouch. So on its way to the brain, there was a reflex that bypassed that pathway to the brain. You see, you bypass so that you can respond immediately. We're going to study those three different functions. But to appreciate the different functions of the spinal cord, we're going to look at first the anatomy of this spinal cord. First of all, look at the spinal cord, your nervous tissue. They grow, but by 4 or maximum 5 years old, you're done growing, as far as the spinal cord is concerned. But I know that your height from 5 years old, you got taller, right? So your bone is not done growing at 5 years old. And that's why if you look at these nerves, the nerves that come out of your spinal cord are called spinal nerves. So all of these nerves that you see here, you call them spinal nerves. The nerves that came out of my brain, I call them cranial nerves. Okay? And I said that the spinal cord is finished growing or developing by 4 or 5 years old, but the bone right here is still growing. So look at these cranial nerves. Do you notice? Right here, up here, because they leave, see, what come out of the spinal cord are nerves, these yellow ones. if you look at these nerves, they have to leave or exit through the intervertebral foramen. The one in the center is the vertebral foramen. In between the vertebrae, you call them intervertebral foramen. So what occupies the vertebral foramen is the spinal cord itself. In the intervertebral foramen are the spinal nerves. You notice that up here, the upper segments, they leave out of their own space. So C1 is the C1 spinal nerve, C2, C3, okay? And so as they go down, they have to come out of their actual level. So the bone here is still growing, but the spinal cord is done growing. It stops by L2, L3. That's how far the spinal cord normally reaches. The tip of the spinal cord stops by L2, L3. So you see, that's why if you look at the spinal nerves, by the time you look at the lower segments, they still have to reach down and exit their own intervertebral foramen. That is the reason why when you go down right here, there's an angle, it goes down, because they have to reach out their own exit over here. And so that's why if you look at this next slide over here, you look at this dipping down of your spinal nerves. By the time you get to the lowest segments, by L3, L4, L5 to the sacral and all of that, they're forming like a horse's tail. This is what they refer to as cauda equina. Don't need to worry about that. But that's why it's dipping down, because they still, even though the bone grew, these nerves, they have to look and go out of their own opening, okay? And that is very important if you think about it, because did we discuss how each and every nerve, as they leave, they take with them a portion of the meninges? Do you remember that? I think we discussed that, right? And so, as they leave out here, a part of those meninges is coming out. And we know that the meninges is collagen and bone is collagen. That's how it anchors them, right there. They're tightly kept in place, right in the center. And towards the most inferior part, right here, okay? If you highlight that one, you will see there is, okay, well, I'm just going to go back here. You see this phylum terminale? So, like the candy wrapper, right? If you have a candy, and there's a wrapper, you wrap it tightly on each end, and that's what's going on right here. All of those meninges towards the end, they're gathered in one strong cord, and it anchors it to the bone right here of the coccyx. That's why it's called phylum terminale. It's also called a coccygeal ligament. A ligament is a connective tissue that connects bone to bone. Here, it anchors the spinal cord to the bone. So really, up there, anchoring of your meninges at the foramen magnum, very tight. Plus right here, tight. Over here, this one, coccygeal ligament, like that. It's just kept taut so that it's not going to keep swaying whatever you do. Do you follow? Okay? And so, you see, knowing that the spinal cord in any human, normally, it's done. It stops growing by the level of L2, L3, that's it. Now it makes sense when you go for an epidural or they do a spinal tap, they always go between L3, L4 or L4, L5, because then you are safe to not damage your spinal cord. You're not going to damage it because it's done. What's over here are just the nerves that's trying to reach to their opening, okay? So if they ask you why you have to do an epidural or a spinal tap at the level of L4, L5, you know the answer, Okay? So, we will cut open the spinal cord right here. If you do a transverse cut of the spinal cord, it's the opposite of the cerebrum. Remember the cerebrum, the outermost, the cortex is gray, and the inner part is the white matter. It's just the opposite in the spinal cord. In the spinal cord, the central area is gray matter, and the white matter is the periphery. So we assume, what makes it gray again? What part of the neuron makes it gray? The cell body. So we assume this is how the neurons are arranged in the spinal cord. I don't know if you can picture that. So here's my nerve right here. Let's say this is my sensory neuron, right? And then there's the spinal, the ganglion. Then there's the axon synapsing with another neuron. Where do they synapse? They synapse in the gray area because there's the cell body of the next neuron. So this is where they communicate. And then this next neuron will have to, the axon part leaves and goes up to the next segment in the white matter. So that is how they are arranged, okay? Again, I have a nicer picture over here. Right here. You see that? Look, there's your white matter and there's your gray matter. So this is made up of neurons. I'm looking at the color. I know that the white matter is where axons will be. The gray matter is where the cell body of the neurons will be. So the gray matter is like where, you know, when you go for a race, you have to do a pit stop or you get gas. Here, the gray matter is just where the cell bodies talk to each other. Not the cell body, but the cell body and the axon where they, remember that's the that's the synaptic junction. So this is where the synapse is, right? And then the axon passes through the white matter. So that's how they go up and down, through the white matter. So the white matter is made up of collections of axons. This is what make up what you call tracts. Do you remember in the spinal cord you also have the tracts, the commissural tracts, the association tracts, and the projection tracts? They are in the white matter. It's the same here. Here, it's also tracts. But we call them ascending tracts or descending tracts. It's in the white matter. In the gray matter is when the cell bodies communicate or coordinate, right? It's a relay. It's not just one neuron goes all the way up. It's several neurons, the association neurons. Are you able to picture that, everybody? Okay, you think? What you think? So there's my neuron. Look at this picture. In this picture, you have a sensory neuron. This is the sensory neuron, right? Receives the information or stimulus. It's the dendrite part of the sensory neuron that receives that stimulus. Look, the cell body of that sensory neuron is outside of the spinal cord. They are collected, all the cell bodies of sensory neurons, they collect in a bulge called a ganglion. This is called the dorsal root ganglion. Okay? So that's why, do you remember, you can classify neurons according to shape. One of the shapes of neurons is called unipolar neurons. All unipolar neurons are sensory in function. Only sensory neurons can be unipolar. There is no unipolar motor neuron. In my past tests on the spinal cord and pathways, there was a picture like this. And you're supposed to label which one is which. I'll just put an arrow and you label. The spinal cord follows the same rule where ventral is motor and dorsal is sensory in function. So if you cut this, I know that this is ventral because you look at where the bulge is. Wherever there's that bulge, That's dorsal. And dorsal is sensory in function. So look at the spinal cord always has what do you call this? What's that term? There's two nerve bundles that come out of it. Okay? And then from here, you have this nerve. So this part here, this one right here, this is this one. This is the nerve right here. And when it enters the spinal cord, you see they separate into two. Okay? So this is one nerve, and they split into two, and you see they connect with the spinal cord, one posterior and the other one is ventral. It's a little bit complicated, but it's not. We're going to try and simplify it. We trace this neuron first. These are my peripheral spinal nerves. And I had you locate one when you dissected the cat. Remember the sciatic nerve? If you trace that all the way, you go all the way up, you'll see your intercostal nerves, you'll see if you go down there, it moves on to become the femoral nerve, then the tibial nerve. That's this one. There is no such thing, I don't know if you've heard of, have you heard of a sensory sciatic nerve, motor? No, sciatic nerve is just one, right? Just sciatic nerve. You call it sciatic or median nerve or axillary nerve, just one nerve. But if you look at it in this picture, look at it. Each and every spinal nerve is called a mixed nerve, meaning all your spinal nerves are both sensory and motor in function. All spinal nerves. You remember the cranial nerves when we studied? Some of them are purely sensory, some mainly motor, some are mixed. But here in the spinal cord, all of these nerves that come out, they are all mixed nerve, meaning they're both sensory and motor in function. It's when they enter the spinal cord that they go their separate ways. You see that? So let's say this is my axillary nerve, let's say, okay? And so I had, let's say you put something, you were burnt, whatever, you were burnt over here. And so your sensory, the sensory part of that axillary nerve receive that sensation, you see? And it will enter the dorsal horn. This gray area is referred to as horns. It looks like a butterfly. And each protrusion is called a horn. So this is the dorsal gray horn. This is the ventral gray horn. Do you follow? Okay? So these are horns. And what do you see here? Cell bodies. This is the white matter. And this is referred to as the columns or the tracts. That's where you find the axons. So we go back to our scenario where you were burned, your axillary or whatever nerve, right? And that burning sensation was received by a sensory neuron. Unipolar. All sensory neurons are unipolar. And so the dendrite, there's my dendrite, there's my cell body. The cell body of sensory neurons, the receptors, are always outside of the central nervous system. They collect in a ganglion. See, it's still outside, right? Do you remember the satellite cells? That's why they have to be here to protect your neuron cell bodies. Because why? They're not protected by bone. You following? Okay? So from here, the axon will synapse with the next neuron. Where? At the dorsal gray horn. So this dorsal gray horn of every spinal cord level, it contains sensory neurons. They have a sensory function. They're going to go up to the brain. Okay? So they synapse with the next neuron, you see? And they can cross over or they can go up if they're both ascending. Okay? So they go to the brain, and you say, oh my goodness, I burned myself, whatever. So you're going to respond. Maybe you're going to close your arm, whatever you want to do when you burn yourself. So motor, you go down, and you're going to respond. You see, this is motor in function. Look at where the motor neuron is going to leave out of the ventral gray horn. So the ventral gray horn of the spinal cord is always motor. It always contains motor neurons. And then you look at, so what part of the neuron stimulates the muscle to contract? Dendrite, cell body, or axon? What? Axon, very good. So there's the axon. So look at, there's the axon, right? That stimulates this muscle to contract. So again, where did this motor neuron originate? From the ventral gray horn, you see? And then it leaves through your ventral root. So now we're going to add to your labeling. These structures that come out of the spinal cord, you call them roots. These are roots. Like the root of the tree, right? This is the root. See? This is the dorsal root. This is the ventral root. The ventral root is always motor, and the dorsal root is always sensory. How do you know which one is the dorsal root? By the ganglion, the bulge. And what is the function of the dorsal root? It's always sensory. And this is always motor, right? And look at, when they come out, they fuse to become just one nerve. So this is the one nerve that I know of. Axillary nerve, sciatic nerve, whatever nerve. So every single nerve in the body contains both sensory and motor fibers. When they enter the spinal cord, they go their separate ways. Do you see? Okay? So that's why it is possible when you injure just the sensory fibers, you're going to have problems with sensation. But because this is still intact, you can still move your muscles. If you cut it, then there'll be no sensation. There'll also be paralysis. Does it make sense? Okay? So here, this is the root. This is the root. I'm going to add one more word. This nerve, the one that I had, the sciatic nerve, this is what you call the ramus. So this nerve that comes out now, this one here, every single nerve here, this is called ramus. Ramus. Okay? Let's look at this again. By the way, okay, we're going to go look at this one. So here, see? And depending on the effector organ, you have actually different rami. This is called a ramus. So you have a ventral ramus, a dorsal ramus, a meningeal branch, and the rami communicantis. So what are these? These are the nerves that we know of. Your sciatic nerve, your axillary nerve, your pelvic splanchnic nerve, your cardiac nerve. All the nerves that come out of the spinal cord, they're called ramus. So this ramus, it depends on where you find them. And also the effector organ, you call them, look at, the dorsal ramus. The dorsal ramus are what you call the nerves that innervate the back. All nerves that you see in the back, you call them dorsal ramus nerves. What kind of nerve is this? Mixed. Mixed. All of them are mixed. Are you following? So then, the ventral ramus, look at, the ventral ramus are the ones in anterior, plus the limbs. So all the rest of the ramus right here that stimulate my skeletal muscles in my anterior body wall, plus the upper and lower limbs, that's a ventral ramus nerve. Then all the nerves that take care of my viscera, my internal organs, you call them rami communicantes. They're all mixed. Okay? And then finally, there's also a nerve that goes back and innervates your spinal cord itself. You call that the meningeal branch. Meningeal branch. Okay? One more time. It's not really hard. It's just trying to remember those terms. The difference between a ramus and the root. Just remember the root is from the tree, right? So the root is this one. I'm going to go back to this picture. Let's look at this nicer picture over here. Here. So all of these neurons that we see here, these are all ramus. These are all mixed neurons, right? All of them are ramus. We call them ramus. When they enter the spinal cord over here, this is where they go their separate ways. They become the root. So let's say this is my median nerve, let's say, or my ulnar nerve, right? So I respond to a pain or touch or temperature. So it's the sensory part of that ramus that will respond to that pain, right? And then we'll go up. So what ramus is this one? Because it's in my right hand, it must be the ventral ramus. Then, but it's the sensory part, it will enter what? The dorsal root. It will enter the dorsal root. So then go up, because it's a sensory, enter the dorsal root, go up to my brain, right? Then I want to pull my hand out. So from here, motor pathway goes down to exit what? Through the ventral root. And so then it still goes down. Now becomes the ramus again. It's a ventral ramus because it's my upper limb to tell my hand to pull away. Do you see? Okay. How about, again, I felt pain over here, right? So I felt pain. This is my ventral ramus going inside dorsal root, right? Where the dorsal root ganglion is. Enter my spinal cord, go up ascending pathways. Now my heart is racing because I am in so much pain. So what stimulated my heart to contract? Go up there, go down, leave my ventral gray horn, right? Ventral. Now it's the ventral root. Go down the ventral root and through the rami communicantes to stimulate my heart. So the one that stimulates my heart is the rami communicantes. But what do you call these nerves? As far as function is concerned, they are all mixed nerves. All these ramuses or rami, they're all mixed nerves. Do you think you got that? You see the difference between root, ramus. Ramus is every nerve. We call them all ramus, right? And it depends on where it's located. The nerves that stimulate my back, you call them dorsal ramus. Over, right here, upper and lower limbs, and the front, ventral ramus. The ones that innervate my internal organs, we call them rami communicantes, right? And the one that goes back and innervates or takes care, because you can have meningitis, right? That's the meningeal branch. But each and every one of those rami, this is ramus, each and every one of them are mixed. They are both sensory and motor in function. So now this slide and this slide makes sense, right? This slide, they're both the same slides. Just one looks at your sensory and the other one looks at your motor fibers. See, the sensory part enters through the dorsal root. I see the dorsal root because there's the dorsal great horn. Then the motor part leaves the ventral gray horn and the ventral root, you see? Then it becomes the same nerve. So every ramus is mixed. Okay? So just know the effector organs. The rami communicantes, which we're going to study when we study the autonomic nervous system, they take care of your internal organs. This one, just the back is dorsal ramus. The front is your ventral ramus plus the upper and lower limbs. Okay? I'm going to add to this one. You following so far? Look at this. You can tell which level of the spinal cord the section was taken from. You see this? It's called the lateral gray horn. Not all spinal cord sections will have this lateral gray horn. So this is the dorsal gray horn and this is the ventral gray horn. In some sections, the ventral gray horn is just like this. Only in the thoracic section, so T1 to T12, spinal cord levels will have this lateral bulge called the lateral gray horn. Out of the lateral gray horn is where you will find the neurons that innervate my visceral organs. Okay? Right? Because my internal organs, my heart, my lungs, they're all right here. So that's why in the test, I would always ask, see? Look at the blue one right here. So out of that one is where my, great, the motor, right? That's the origin for my visceral motor neurons. You know the word viscerals, right? Visceral means internal. Okay? So in the test, what I had in the test was always a section of the spinal cord like this. And I would have arrows. I label the following parts. Even here. I would ask the students to label them. So you know for sure that this was one of my favorite parts of the test. It always never fails that I always have a picture of that one and you're supposed to label which one is a root, which one is a ramus. And then I always also ask, looking at the picture, what level do you think could this cut be taken from? So you will write, if you see a bulge, you'll write thoracic. And also you can tell if it was cervical, lumbar, because cervical, there's not too many, so it's smaller than the lumbar. The lumbar gets bigger. But really the main, always the main picture that I always use has this bulge. So it's obvious when you see that bulge, this is from the thoracic. This is where you find that brain-mind communicantes. Going to innervate what? My internal organs. Do you follow this? Do you have any questions on this part? Okay. So you see as they leave, so now look at this picture over here. Now it's very easy to identify, right? So there's the ramus. This is ramus. I think this was the picture that I used. So there's your ramus and there's your roots. This is the dorsal root. There's the I know this is the dorsal. Look where the bulge is. That's where the dorsal root is, right? Because this is where the cell bodies of my sensory neurons are found. So there's the dorsal root. This is the dorsal gray horn. From here, the axon will go up or down. The axon part of every neuron is found in the white matter, not in the gray matter, right? In the gray matter is where you find the cell body communicating with the next one. Then when they have to go up or down, they go up or down here. So what does the white matter contain? It contains all axons. Very good. Okay? Okay? So, now that you know that, I'm going to add one more. Let's take a break for 5 minutes. There's always one more.